You wake up each morning with a choice: to repeat the same mental patterns of yesterday or to reshape the mind into something stronger. The Stoics believed that the mind is not fixed. It is not a fortress built once and for all. It is a garden, and like any garden, it grows what you plant in it daily. If you sow anxiety, you harvest fear. If you plant patience, you reap peace. Your brain is not your enemy, it is your instrument, but it must be tuned daily, deliberately, through thought, reflection, and action. The modern world has convinced many people that personality is a permanent identity, that emotional reactions are involuntary truths, and that habits define who you are. The Stoics would look upon this mindset as a kind of spiritual laziness. Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor and a daily practitioner of Stoicism, wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." He knew the brain adapts to what we feed it, and he did not believe in feeding it chaos. Rewiring your brain is not a moment of inspiration. It is a way of life. It is daily work, like sculpting stone with a chisel. Except this sculpture is your own nature. Each thought you entertain, each response you give, each decision you make presses into your neural fabric a direction, one that leads either to discipline or decay, to virtue or vice. The Stoic does not leave that up to chance. In this video, we explore how the Stoics trained their minds, how they rewired their responses to suffering, chaos, and the pressures of life, and how you can adopt this same daily strategy of mental craftsmanship. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Recognize the programming. Before you can rewire anything, you must understand what you're working with. Your brain is not a blank slate, it's a living history. It has been shaped over time by the rhythm of your choices, the impact of your traumas, the seduction of comfort, and the whispers of fear and desire. Every experience, every repeated emotion, every unchallenged belief has carved grooves into the mind. Most people live as passengers in their own minds. They don't question their thoughts. They obey them, as if every idea was a command from a higher authority. But the Stoics didn't obey thoughts. They interrogated them. They didn't worship their emotions. They examined them for truth and usefulness. Epictetus said, "It is not things that trouble us, but our judgments about them." This simple insight is the foundation of Stoic brain training. You are not anxious because of the world. You are anxious because of how you interpret the world. You are not angry because someone offended you. You are angry because you chose, even if unconsciously, to consider their words important. You gave them weight. You framed them with meaning. This subtle but powerful shift, from passive victim of emotion to active examiner of thought, is the spark where true rewiring begins. It's the first thread you pull that unravels the whole illusion. The brain thrives on patterns. It is a survival machine, not a truth-seeking compass. It seeks shortcuts and habitual tracks to reduce effort and energy use. This means it values repetition and routine above all else. What you rehearse, you reinforce. If you rehearse fear daily, whether through imagined disasters, negative self-talk, or social comparison, your mind becomes a master at fear. It responds to the world with hypervigilance, constantly scanning for danger. The very same mechanism, when aligned with courage, presence, and clarity, will build strength instead of panic. The more you travel a mental path, the faster your brain lays down concrete on that road, wrapping it in layers of familiarity and speed. The tracks become highways. This is both empowering and terrifying. Empowering when you're building the right road, terrifying when the route leads to ruin. So when you recognize your default programming, those instant reactions, those spirals of worry or shame, those emotionally hijacked loops, you gain something invaluable, the ability to pause and edit the script. You do not accept the story by default. You become the author of the narrative. This is not denial, It is not repression, it's authorship, it's conscious revision, and it's how you reclaim agency over a mind that often pretends it's on autopilot. This isn't abstract philosophy floating above practical life. It's hard science. It's grounded neuroscience. The brain's plasticity, the way it forms and reforms its neural architecture, means you are not doomed to live inside the patterns you inherited or created long ago. You are not sentenced to repeat the same mistakes or cling to the same emotional scripts. Change is not automatic, and it's never easy, but it is available to those who consistently engage with their thoughts, emotions, and decisions. The Stoics, without the benefit of neuroscience or brain scans, understood this intuitively. They did not have functional MRIs or cortical mapping, but they observed the evidence in their lives and in the conduct of others. They understood that repeated thought patterns solidify into character, that unexamined emotion grows wild like an untended field, and that the mind, left untrained, becomes a chaos of impulses. Their wisdom was not born in lecture halls or books, but earned through raw introspection, relentless practice, and a tireless pursuit of clarity. They treated the mind like a garden, constantly pruning away falsehoods, trimming back passions, and fertilizing it with rationality and virtue. They practiced self-awareness not as a soft sentiment, but as an act of internal strength. They did not journal for vanity. They did it as a martial art of the mind. They sharpened perception like a blade. They drilled emotional responses like a soldier preparing for battle. They understood that self-awareness wasn't indulgent. It was essential. To them, every thought had weight. Every emotion was examined. Not all were accepted. They saw thought not as a river to be swept away by, but as a system to be inspected, challenged, and purified. Marcus Aurelius, in the quiet of his chamber, did not indulge in self-praise or self-pity. He did not pontificate for approval. He used solitude like a crucible. He reviewed his conduct with brutal honesty, tracing each flaw back to its root. He wasn't writing to impress the public. He wasn't crafting legacy. He wrote not to impress, not to publish, but to dissect his own soul. Ink was his scalpel. Reflection was his surgery. His journal was his battlefield, a place to confront ego, silence resentment, and steel his mind for the day ahead. His daily writing was a battle report, a strategy update, a recalibration of character. And with it, he kept his inner life aligned, disciplined, and clean from the rot of unexamined reaction. He reminded himself of what mattered. He stripped away excess, not just material, but mental clutter, emotional indulgence, and philosophical noise. He knew that the weight of unnecessary thought weakens clarity. He did not let the privileges of power soften his clarity. He refused to allow comfort to dull his edge or entitlement to cloud his sense of duty. Each entry was a rehearsal of who he intended to be, not an ideal self, but a practiced one, forged in daily repetition and unflinching self-examination. He rehearsed for life like a warrior sharpens his blade, not for show, but for readiness. And in that tireless rehearsal, he became it, not in one moment, not through grand gestures, but gradually, layer by layer, through the discipline of reflection, correction, and realignment. The Stoics believed you do not become good by wishing. You become good by aligning thought with action, emotion with intention, day by day, sentence by sentence, choice by choice. They saw virtue not as a destination, but as a practice, something to be worked into your bones through repetition. They knew that a clear mind does not happen by accident. It is not inherited. It is not the byproduct of a lucky temperament. It is built. It is sustained. It is maintained like a temple and corrected like a ship veering off course. It requires attention, daily recentering, and the humility to admit error and start again. This path is not glamorous, but it is sacred. and it is available to anyone who commits to walking it. Again and again, through storm and silence, through trial and stillness, you return to the path of virtue, not because you must, but because you know, deep down, that no other path leads to peace. Begin a daily thought audit. Set aside a few minutes each evening to write down the dominant emotions you experience throughout your day. Don't judge them, just record them honestly, as you would describe the weather. Was it stormy with anger, cloudy with confusion, calm with clarity? Become familiar with the emotional climate of your inner world. Then ask yourself, where did each emotion originate? Were they triggered by actual external events, or were they the product of your interpretation of those events? Was your anger caused by what someone said, or by your decision to take offense? Was your anxiety caused by a situation, or by your imagined consequence of it? Next, take those same events and emotions and put them under the lens of Stoicism. Write down how a Stoic might have viewed the same situation. Would Marcus Aurelius have been shaken by someone cutting him off in traffic? Would Epictetus have allowed an insult to disrupt his sense of inner peace? Use the perspective of the wise to challenge your own assumptions. This isn't about comparing yourself harshly. It's about learning to see alternatives to your default responses. Then, rewrite your response, not to change the past, but to change your default wiring for the future. Think of it as a mental rehearsal. You are training your nervous system to respond with reason instead of reflex. You are teaching yourself that not every spark deserves to become a fire. This exercise is not passive reflection. It's active reprogramming. It's conscious self-editing. It's neural editing. With each entry, you begin to train your mind to process life through clarity, not chaos. Through measured perspective, not impulsive distortion. And over time, what began as a nightly practice becomes a way of seeing, a way of living, and ultimately, a way of being. Chapter 2. Choose your inner architecture. Once you recognize your old patterns, you must choose new ones. Rewiring the brain is not about deleting, it's about replacing. It's about designing. You are the architect of your mind, and your values are the blueprint. You must make conscious choices about the scaffolding of your inner life. Each principle you choose is a foundational beam. Each truth you accept becomes a reinforcing wall, and every time you commit to living according to these designs, you build something more stable, something more serene. The Stoics believed in intentional thinking. They did not wait for peace. They cultivated it. They did not hope for courage, they trained it. The architecture of the mind, like a temple, must be constructed with precision and reverence. Every thought is a brick, every reflection is a beam, every act of self-restraint, a pillar. Each day is a new chance to lay down stronger mental structure, not out of fear, but out of devotion to something higher than impulse. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." This statement alone reveals how poorly constructed most minds are. They crumble at imagined scenarios. They collapse under hypothetical fears. They are like houses made of paper, vulnerable to even the breeze of a what-if. The Stoic mind, by contrast, is built to endure, not because it is immune to pain, but because it is built on truth, not fear, not illusion. It holds up under pressure because it was never dependent on the external world for its strength. Your brain learns by attention. What you pay attention to becomes stronger. That's how the brain decides what matters. If you focus on trivial insults, they grow larger in your mind. If you meditate on virtue, it deepens your sense of self. Attention is your inner spotlight, and whatever you place under it, your brain begins to amplify and reinforce. So when you choose your values, when you commit to living with reason, justice, courage, and discipline, you begin a kind of inner renovation. a restructuring of your internal universe. The walls of anxiety begin to fall. The foundation of resilience grows deeper. You cannot simply remove bad habits. You must install better ones. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does the human mind. When you tear out an old mental habit, be it fear, pride, resentment, or procrastination, you leave behind an empty groove in the brain's circuitry. That void will not stay empty. If you do not consciously replace it, the old habit returns or a new one forms in its place, often unconsciously. The mind resists emptiness. It clings to familiarity. And in the absence of conscious restructuring, the unconscious defaults take over again. This is why true transformation is not just subtraction. It is replacement, reinforcement, and construction of something better. It is the daily laying down of a new track, one intentional choice at a time. If you remove fear, you must replace it with preparedness, deep, practiced readiness for what life may bring. Not the illusion that nothing will go wrong, but the clarity that you will endure it when it does. Not denial of danger, but cultivated resilience. If you remove vanity, you must replace it with humility. Not weakness, but the strength to see yourself clearly without exaggeration. Humility allows you to grow. It allows correction. It strips away ego and makes space for truth. If you remove anger, you must replace it with reasoned strength, a firm but unshakable calm, able to respond to provocation without collapsing into outrage. Strength that does not shout. Strength that holds the line without needing applause. The brain does not erase, it rewires. The grooves remain unless overwritten. And what you install in place of your old reactions, through consistent action, repeated awareness, and courageous honesty, will determine the tone and shape of your inner world, the soundtrack of your thoughts, the lens through which you experience reality. The Stoics knew that every emotion is a signal, not a command. Emotions were like messengers. They brought news, but they did not carry authority. They arrived with urgency, but not with truth. They knocked on the door, but they did not own the house. The Stoic listens to the knock, but does not automatically open the door. He pauses, he questions, he asks, is this emotion rooted in virtue or vice, in wisdom or illusion? Anxiety means you're too attached to something ephemeral, your reputation, your timeline, your illusion of control. It grows when the mind confuses the uncertain with the catastrophic. Anger means you're trying to control what is outside your reach, others' actions, others' words, others' thoughts. It swells when the ego believes it has jurisdiction over the will of others. Envy means you've measured your worth through comparison and found yourself wanting, not because you are, but because you looked outward instead of inward. It festers when gratitude is replaced by scarcity. Each of these emotions has a root, and once that root is identified, it can be redirected into strength. Anxiety can become preparation, the readiness to respond, not react. It can become focus, planning, presence. Anger can become resolve, firm but measured action toward justice, not vengeance. It can become fire under control, heat without destruction. Envy can become admiration, a recognition of potential within yourself, yet to be awakened. It can become motivation to rise without resentment. Each emotion becomes a lesson, not a master, a map, not a dictator, a teacher, not a tyrant. You do not silence them by force. You quiet them with understanding. And through these lessons, and through your daily choices to respond with wisdom instead of impulse, the architecture of your mind becomes stronger, clearer, and more resilient. You begin to build not just emotional control, but emotional intelligence. It becomes less a place of reaction and more a place of mastery, a temple, not a battlefield. This inner transformation is not just about becoming calm, it's about becoming capable. capable of facing storms without losing your center, capable of standing alone when others waver, capable of walking through fire with clarity intact. Calm is not passivity. It is precision. It is composure. It is the ability to act deliberately under pressure, not because you are numb, but because you are anchored in principle. When you honor these emotional lessons and rewrite your responses, you no longer live at the mercy of your moods. You stop being a puppet pulled by the strings of circumstance. You are not bounced between highs and lows like a leaf in the wind. You live in alignment with the person you are choosing to become every day, not once, not occasionally, but constantly, through discipline, through virtue, through reflection, through conscious awareness, and through the unbreakable will to live as your best self. A self not defined by fleeting emotion, but by unwavering commitment to truth and inner strength. That is Stoic rewiring. That is the transformation of soul and spirit in motion. Create a list of core Stoic values, such as discipline, courage, justice, wisdom, temperance, humility, and patience. Choose one per week to focus on, not just as a concept, but as a lens through which you interpret every action, decision, and emotion. Treat it like a training regimen. If you pick discipline, then for 7 days, every decision is filtered through that lens. From how you rise in the morning, to how you react to interruptions, to how you close your day, each choice becomes an opportunity to affirm that value. You train your awareness to ask, what would discipline do here? Would it delay gratification? Would it stay silent instead of reacting? Would it keep going when comfort calls for retreat? By filtering your life through one value at a time, you begin to embody it more deeply. Your mind becomes less cluttered by ambiguity and more defined by intention. Over time, this process reshapes the circuitry of your default decision-making. The brain learns not just what you believe, but how to live it. And soon, these values are no longer weekly themes. They become your reflexes. They become the character you return to under pressure, the instinct you lean on in adversity. This is how the abstract becomes concrete. This is how Stoicism becomes a living force in your daily life. Chapter 3. Train through adversity. No amount of reading or reflecting will rewire your mind without resistance. You cannot become mentally strong by thinking about it. Mental transformation requires friction. You must test what you believe. You must test what you practice. You must test who you are when life doesn't go according to plan. The Stoics trained in life itself. They saw every hardship not as a curse, but as raw material, an opportunity to shape the mind, forge the will, and harden the resolve. In the fire of adversity, they saw their chance to become unbreakable. Marcus Aurelius didn't complain about being emperor, even though the weight of ruling an empire, leading armies, enduring betrayals, and watching people he loved die could have crushed him. He used it to train his patience, to purify his intentions, to lead from a place of virtue instead of vanity. Epictetus didn't resent being born into slavery. He didn't use it as an excuse. He used it to train his character, to gain control of what no one could take from him, his response. Adversity, to the Stoic, was the weight that builds mental muscle. Without it, the mind becomes weak. The spirit softens. Character atrophies. This is not romanticizing pain. It is respecting what pain can teach. Pain is not always noble, but it is always useful. It strips away comfort and reveals character. It unearths the beliefs we claim to hold and tests whether they are anchored deep or merely floating at the surface. The brain learns best through experience. Raw, uncomfortable, honest experience. Through contrast, through discomfort. When life turns up the heat, the mind is either melted or molded. That is why adversity is not the enemy. It is the furnace of transformation. When you face difficulty with a clear mind, when you respond to insults with silence, when you choose restraint over reaction, you are not just enduring, you are encoding. You are forging mental armor, neuron by neuron. You are writing new instructions into your nervous system, instructions that say, I am no longer controlled by emotion. I decide who I am. I do not run from discomfort. I grow through it. I do not shatter under pressure. I am shaped by it. You cannot rewire your brain without adversity, because adversity is the testing ground. It's the proving arena. It's the crucible where you separate theory from truth. It's where your principles are put to trial and your values are shown to be either real or decorative. It's where the mind is stripped of pretense and revealed in its true condition. Anyone can quote philosophy in moments of stillness, but only adversity reveals whether that philosophy lives in your bones. It's easy to preach virtue in comfort. It's another thing entirely to practice it when tested. It's one thing to be calm in peace. It's another to remain centered in chaos. That's where the transformation is revealed. That's where the mask falls and the real self emerges. The furnace of suffering reveals what lectures cannot, the resilience you've built or failed to build. It shines a spotlight on every crack in your character. You must welcome hard moments. Not because suffering is holy, but because what they awaken in you, courage, perspective, endurance, humility, and resolve, is priceless. These traits are not available in books. They do not come through intention alone. They are earned in the trenches of life, where your ideals are not just discussed, but demanded. In those moments when you are tired, when the future is uncertain, when you are tempted to abandon your principles for short-term relief, that is where real rewiring happens. Not in the theory, but in the resistance. Not in knowing what's right, but in choosing it under pressure. It is in adversity that you stop rehearsing and start becoming. You step into the arena where there are no spectators, only truth. You test your philosophy, your discipline, your will. You grow roots that no storm can tear out. You develop a presence that doesn't vanish under stress. You learn to walk into difficulty not with panic, but with poise. You do not rise by avoiding the fire. You rise by walking through it, mind steady, heart grounded, soul unmoved. That is the Stoic way. And each time you do, the path becomes easier to walk. The mind becomes more familiar with peace under fire, and you become more yourself than ever before. Adopt the habit of voluntary discomfort. Seneca practiced cold baths, fasting, and other methods, not because he liked it, but because he wanted to build proof that he didn't need comfort to function. Do something uncomfortable every day. It doesn't have to be extreme. It can be as simple as taking a cold shower, push-ups, sit-ups, weight training, walking instead of driving, having a difficult conversation you've been avoiding, or going an hour without your phone. The goal isn't punishment, it's exposure. Exposure to discomfort trains your nervous system to stop treating challenge as a threat. Let each act of discomfort serve as a reminder that you are capable of moving toward resistance rather than running from it. Let it sharpen your edge, dissolve your excuses, and fortify your tolerance for the unknown. Let it train your brain to stop fleeing from life and start leaning into it with intention, awareness, and presence. Chapter 4. Repeat until it's who you are. The brain rewires not through force, but through repetition. What you do daily becomes who you are. It becomes the new default. You are what you rehearse. Stoicism is not a philosophy of epiphanies. It's a philosophy of consistency, of small daily investments in clarity, resilience, and discipline. It's about showing up to the mind like a craftsman shows up to his tools, each day with deliberate hands and focused intention. The Stoics knew the danger of one-off efforts. A man is not disciplined because he did one disciplined thing. He is disciplined because he practices it like breathing. Because he chooses the path of effort even when comfort whispers its seduction. He does not visit discipline, he lives in it. Marcus wrote every day, Epictetus taught every day. These men didn't wait to feel inspired. They didn't rely on motivation. They relied on commitment. They showed up. They knew the mind does not become stronger by accident, but by intentional exposure to truth, repetition of virtue, and correction of error. That act of repetition rewired their emotional systems to default to clarity. When pressure came, they responded with principle, not because it was easy, but because they had trained for it. Your thoughts have inertia. Each thought, once entertained, gains momentum like a rolling boulder. If you allow negative, fearful, angry thoughts to gather speed, they become your internal reality. They shape your expectations, your interpretations, and eventually, your identity. The Stoic stops the cycle, not once, but again and again. He sees the anger rise and cuts it off. He feels the worry surface and interrupts it. He confronts his thoughts like a sentry guards a gate. That interruption, repeated daily, rewires the mind, and over time it becomes the new default, one of peace, one of clarity, one of reason. Not because life is easier, but because the mind has been trained to meet it with strength. Create a daily Stoic ritual. It could be 5 minutes of journaling at dawn, a midday mantra, or a silent reflection at night. What matters is that it becomes part of the rhythm of your brain. This rhythm is what creates your new emotional baseline. Chapter 5. The Stoic Mind as a Daily Practice. To rewire your brain is to renew your soul each day. It is the daily turning of the soil of your thoughts, the ritual washing of your mental windows, the sharpening of your inner edge. The Stoics didn't believe in emotional perfection because they knew perfection is a myth, but they believed in vigilance, in returning to the work, in catching the mind before it slips into old patterns. They knew the mind could regress, that it could slide back into comfort, fear, or ego. That's why they stayed close to their practice, not once, not occasionally, but constantly. The Stoic does not wake up and hope to be calm. He engineers it. He plans for it with intention and care. He prepares for insults. He anticipates failure. He walks through scenarios not to invite suffering, but to train clarity. This technique, premeditatio malorum, was their way of inoculating the mind against the poisons of surprise and panic. They mentally rehearsed loss, betrayal, fatigue, and hardship, not to dwell in pessimism, but to walk into the day already grounded. They reminded the brain, you can survive what's coming. You've thought through the pain. Now meet it with presence. And in that preparation, the mind relaxes. It doesn't flinch, it focuses. Seneca said, the whole future lies in uncertainty. Live immediately. This does not mean live recklessly or abandon all structure. It means stop waiting for the perfect moment that may never come. Stop waiting for permission that no one else will grant. Stop waiting for everything to feel right before you begin. Because clarity rarely arrives before action. It is often a consequence of it. Too many people wait for the clouds to part, the wind to still, the signs to align. But Stoicism teaches us that the weather of life is never predictable, and peace is not something found, it is something built. Don't wait for clarity to come from outside. Build it inside. Form it with intention. Construct it with courage. The disciplined mind does not look to the weather of life for its peace. It builds its own forecast. It sets its own rhythm. It steadies itself in the chaos, not by ignoring it, but by facing it. A Stoic doesn't postpone living until the path is smooth. He walks forward when it is jagged, uneven, and uncertain, knowing that the very act of walking creates the way. Rewiring your brain is not a 5-day sprint. It is not a quick reset button or a weekend retreat. It is a lifelong discipline, a devotion to reshaping the deepest assumptions you carry, the habits you reinforce, the interpretations you make moment by moment. One that creates serenity, not through hiding from the storm, but by standing in it with an unshakable center. A composure that's not built on denial, but forged in confrontation. It is a confrontation with the parts of yourself that want to escape, to retreat, to delay, the parts that crave comfort over character, that seek distraction over discipline. And each day that you confront instead of avoid, each moment you resist the impulse to wait, you renew not only your brain, but your spirit. You step into your day not passively, but actively, with resolve and clarity. That is how you move forward in uncertainty, not by waiting for it to vanish, but by living immediately in the presence of it, with strength. Each morning, write down 3 possible difficulties that could arise. These don't have to be life-altering events. Often, it's the small disruptions that test us the most. A rude comment, a delay in traffic, a moment of self-doubt, perhaps dropping an item and breaking it, or cracking the screen of your phone, even running late, spilling coffee, or misplacing your keys. These minor frustrations are the perfect battlefield for testing your character. The Stoics believed that greatness is forged in the small things. If you can't handle a minor inconvenience with dignity, how will you face tragedy with grace? Then write your ideal Stoic response to each scenario. Don't just write vague affirmations, be specific. What would wisdom say in that moment of provocation? What would discipline choose when comfort whispers? What would Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus advise, not in theory, but in your situation, in your life, with your emotional tendencies? Frame your answers in active decisions. For example, if the difficulty is someone cutting you off in traffic, you might write, "I will let it go. I will not give a moment of my peace to something I cannot control." This is the language of the trained mind. Visualize not just the situation, but your reaction. Calm breath, collected thoughts, deliberate action. See your posture, hear your internal dialogue. Feel the beat of your heart as it slows with restraint. Let it play in your mind like a film scene. This isn't just intellectual, it's mental rehearsal. It is as real to the brain as the event itself. You're building neural familiarity with how you want to behave, so when the moment arrives, your brain doesn't panic. It recognizes the path. You've walked it already. You're not improvising, you're remembering your training. Then go live your day with that wiring already installed, like armor beneath your clothes. Carry that mental script with you. Memorize the tone of calm. Recall the mental image of self-mastery. When the challenges come, and they will, you won't be caught off guard. You'll remember, you've trained for this. You anticipated this. You wrote this moment into your day before it arrived. And in that remembrance, your clarity will activate. This simple morning ritual creates a cognitive groove, a Stoic pre-commitment that helps your brain default to principle rather than panic, even in the heat of the moment. Over time, this isn't just a practice, it becomes your identity. Chapter 6. Master the gap between stimulus and response. Every time something happens, your brain experiences a moment of space, a gap between the event and your reaction. This is where freedom lives. Most people miss this gap. They move from trigger to reaction without reflection. But the Stoic sharpens his awareness of this space. He uses it. Epictetus taught, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. This deceptively simple truth strikes at the very core of mental autonomy. It's not the provocation that matters. It's your internal permission for it to disturb you. This means you must become conscious not just of the events around you, but of the mechanics of your inner responses. The way you interpret what happens is not automatic. It is habitual, often unconscious, and shaped by old emotional programming, cultural conditioning, and assumptions you've never questioned. But habits are not destiny. They can be rewritten. What feels automatic is only familiar, not unchangeable. So the goal is to make the unconscious conscious, to become aware of the reflexes that are directing your life from the shadows. In this gap, you can insert clarity. You can reclaim authority over your thoughts and emotions. You can step back and ask, what is truly happening here? Is this worth my peace? What do I control in this moment? What would my highest self choose to do? These questions aren't philosophical fluff. They're tools for rewiring. That brief pause between trigger and reaction is where transformation happens. That moment rewires the brain to prioritize reason over reaction. It turns raw instinct into wise intention. Over time, these pauses become smoother, faster, more natural, until they're no longer pauses, but practiced precision. The Stoic rewires his emotional response not by suppressing it, but by transforming it. He does not shove down anger, he reprocesses it into assertive calm. He does not deny fear, he converts it into strategic preparation. He does not wallow in pain, he channels it into patient endurance. These are not innate reactions. They are built, they are cultivated, they are trained responses, forged deliberately in moments of discomfort and refined over a lifetime. Each time you catch yourself before exploding in frustration, each time you redirect fear into action, each time you choose steadiness when chaos tempts you to collapse, you are laying down new mental circuitry. You are upgrading your operating system. You are proving that you are not just reactive, but conscious, capable, and free. When you feel a strong emotion rise, pause for just 10 seconds. Let that pause be sacred. Take a slow breath. Let your awareness return to the present moment. Interrupt the surge of reactivity, not with suppression, but with presence. Ask, what would the wise man do? Not what your ego would do, not what your fear or pride demands, but what a truly centered, clear-minded person would choose. This is not about suppressing the emotion, it's about observing it without immediately acting on it. It's about giving your higher self a moment to speak before your impulses take control. It's about gaining space to choose the right response, to remind yourself that you are not a slave to emotional reflex. The more you do it, the more that 10-second pause becomes a powerful ritual. The more often you practice it, the faster your brain adopts it as default behavior. Eventually, you won't even need the full 10 seconds. You'll simply become the type of person who doesn't react automatically, but responds wisely, calmly, and deliberately, because that is now who you are. Chapter 7. Detach from what you can't control. One of the most radical rewiring techniques in Stoicism is detachment from the uncontrollable. The mind suffers most when it clings to illusions of control over people, outcomes, opinions, and fate. When we believe that our peace is dependent on external events, we become emotionally enslaved to them. We ride the emotional roller coaster of other people's moods, the economy's fluctuations, and the endless tide of public opinion. The Stoics saw this as the root of anxiety, not the chaos of the world, but our insistence that it conform to our expectations. So they trained themselves to let go, not as a form of indifference, but as a form of strength. At the core of Stoic teaching is the dichotomy of control. Epictetus wrote, "Some things are up to us, and some things are not." This is not a passive idea, it is an active strategy. It requires mental clarity to discern the difference and daily discipline to accept it. Most people waste their mental energy fighting what is outside of their hands. They argue with reality. They rage against things they cannot command. But the Stoic doesn't. The Stoic conserves that energy and applies it where it counts, within, in choices, in attitudes, in character. When you focus only on what you control, your thoughts, your actions, your values, you create stability. You start to realize that while the external world is full of chaos, your internal world doesn't have to mirror it. Your brain stops chasing outcomes like a gambler chasing dice. It stops fearing judgment like a performer seeking applause. It begins to enjoy what it can influence: effort, intention, virtue. And in that simplicity, peace begins to rise. This is a massive rewiring. It doesn't just change your mood, it reshapes your mental operating system at its core. It transforms how you perceive problems, how you digest setbacks, and how you define your sense of identity. It changes the brain from outcome-driven to principle-driven, from being a scoreboard chaser to a steward of inner discipline, from anxious to calm, from reactive to steady, from volatile to virtuous. You no longer live at the mercy of circumstance, tossed between emotional highs and lows like a ship without a rudder. You begin to live with less noise, less mental clutter, fewer competing narratives pulling your attention in 1,000 directions. The emotional turbulence that once dictated your actions becomes still water. You stop needing everything around you to be perfect because what's inside you is becoming stable, deliberate, and dependable. You don't need the world to behave. You need only to act rightly within it, because your sense of peace no longer depends on the chaos around you. It is no longer held hostage by the moods of others, by the movement of markets, or by the shifting tides of approval. It depends on something deeper, something quiet but indestructible, something you carry with you into every moment: your response, your values, your reasoned will. These are things no one, not fate, not fortune, not failure, can ever take away. They are your internal fortress. They are the software of your soul. And when that code is written well and practiced daily, the external world loses its power to break you. Start each morning by writing 2 columns. On the left, list everything you're concerned about. On the right, write what part of each item is in your control. Then commit to focusing only on the right column. This begins to train the brain to separate signal from noise. Chapter 8. Guard the gates of your mind. The Stoics were extremely careful about what they allowed into their minds. They understood that input becomes identity, that your thoughts are shaped by what you consume, who you listen to, and what you dwell on. They treated the mind like sacred soil, only planting what would grow into virtue. They avoided exposure to anything that would clutter the spirit or corrode the judgment. Even small exposures to gossip, distraction, or meaningless chatter were seen as risks to their internal clarity. Marcus Aurelius warned himself, "The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. Your soul takes on the color of your thoughts." He didn't write this to impress posterity. He wrote it because he needed the reminder, because even emperors are vulnerable to mental pollution. This is why he avoided gossip, drama, and the indulgence of anger. He was not trying to be noble, he was trying to stay sane. He understood that the state of the mind becomes the state of life. What dominates your thoughts defines the texture of your days. The modern mind is bombarded with stimuli, headlines designed to provoke fear, social media engineered for outrage, notifications crafted to hijack attention, arguments, agendas, noise, and endless distractions. If you are not vigilant, your mind becomes a dumping ground for noise. It loses its ability to focus, to discern, to remain rooted in truth. And when your brain is full of chaos, your life will reflect that. Your relationships become reactive. Your work becomes erratic. Your soul feels scattered. You must become a guardian at the gate of your attention, not a wall, but a filter. Choose what you read with discernment. Choose who you listen to based on wisdom, not volume. Choose how you spend your mental energy like you would spend your final breath. This is not about being closed off. It is about being intentional. It's about remembering that attention is your most sacred resource, and whatever captures it shapes you. The Stoic doesn't consume to escape, he consumes to grow. Conduct a 7-day mental detox. Limit mindless social media scrolling to 10 minutes a day. Replace it with reading a page from a Stoic text or watching our latest Stoic video of the day. Something that sharpens the mind and anchors the soul. Journal for 10 minutes to observe the tone of your inner dialogue. Practice mental silence for 5 minutes in the morning. No music, no media, just breath and presence. At the end of the week, reflect on how your thoughts have changed. Are they clearer? Are they more aligned with who you want to be? If so, you've begun the work of guarding your gates and becoming your own master. Chapter 9. Embrace the process, not the outcome. One of the deepest rewiring principles in Stoicism is the shift from outcome obsession to process devotion. Most people live for results. They chase goals, milestones, and achievements, hoping that once they reach them, fulfillment will follow. But this pursuit often leads to anxiety, not peace. The Stoic lives for the rhythm of doing well, of living rightly, of committing to daily excellence for its own sake, not for applause or recognition, but because right action is its own reward. Seneca said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." We waste time obsessing over goals, not because goals are bad, but because fixation on them robs us of presence. We postpone joy, telling ourselves we will feel peace once we succeed. But the Stoic lives in the present moment, because that is where action exists. That is where virtue is tested. That is where the opportunity to live fully resides, not in someday, but in now. When you rewire your brain to focus on the process, you free yourself from the fear of failure. You stop measuring your self-worth by what you have accomplished and start building your identity around what you are committed to doing. You stop asking, "What have I achieved?" and start asking, "How have I shown up today?" You focus on being excellent in the moment, not being praised in the future. This is where true mastery begins. Not in recognition, but in repetition. Not in results, but in rhythm. The mind becomes steady, less reactive, more disciplined. It becomes a tool of creation, not obsession. It shifts from worry to wisdom, from control to flow, from needing validation to simply becoming valuable by how you live. The outcome is never in your control. You can't command the results. You can only command your effort, your time, your presence. The work is yours. The mindset is yours. The values you apply are yours. These are the only things you ever truly own. And if you can anchor yourself in the process, the outcome takes care of itself, or it doesn't matter. You learn to love the path, even when the destination is unclear. You stop holding joy hostage to future achievements. You begin to find joy in the doing itself, not in what the doing may earn. You begin to trust that you are becoming something worthwhile, one quiet, focused day at a time. Set goals based on action, not results. Instead of, "I want to get in shape," say, "I will exercise for 1 hour daily." Instead of, "I want to change my life," say, "I will take action, one task at a time." Instead of, "I want to be successful," say, "I will show up with purpose and consistency every single day." Instead of asking for the external world to reward you, ask yourself to meet your own standard. Train your mind to fall in love with effort. Let effort become your refuge, your peace, your compass. Let it be not just a response to challenge, but a way of life, a steady companion through all seasons. When others are distracted by outcomes, you will be grounded in the act of doing. When the world grows chaotic and noisy, effort will become your quiet declaration of purpose. Let it be the temple you return to when everything outside is uncertain, when you are tempted to abandon yourself, when the ground beneath your feet trembles. In that sanctuary of effort, you will remember who you are and what you stand for. That's how peace replaces anxiety, not because life gets easier, but because you meet it with steadiness. That's how meaning rises from motion, not from finishing the race, but from how you run it. That's how fulfillment becomes a daily act of devotion, not something earned someday, but something practiced in each moment of integrity, discipline, and resolve. The Stoic does not look for shortcuts or applause. He finds strength in showing up again and again, even when no one is watching. And that's how the Stoic builds a life. One moment, one action, one intentional breath at a time, never waiting, always becoming. Becoming more grounded, becoming more aware, becoming more in tune with what matters most. The path is not about achieving perfection. It's about returning to practice. It's about giving your best effort now, not later, not eventually, but now. Because now is all you ever truly own. And if you own the now with everything you have, you will look back and see a life well built, stone by stone, breath by breath. Chapter 10. Never stop the practice. The final and most essential truth. This is not a project you complete. It is not a chapter you finish and shelve. It is a practice you maintain, a discipline you carry through seasons of triumph and struggle. Rewiring your brain is not a short-term goal. It is a lifelong devotion to becoming better, not better than others, but better than the old version of yourself. To living closer to reason, to truth, to virtue, not just in public, but in the unseen hours when no one is watching. It's not something you master once. It's something you return to daily, humbly, deliberately. Marcus Aurelius didn't stop writing to himself just because he was emperor. In fact, the more responsibility he held, the more he needed to guard his mind. He used the page not as a stage, but as a sanctuary. Epictetus didn't stop teaching because he became respected. His wisdom wasn't stored, it was practiced over and over, through conversation, through hardship, through quiet conviction. The Stoics understood that the mind is always vulnerable to decay, that without attention, the weeds grow back, that without vigilance, the old reflexes return. So they made awareness a ritual. They made discipline a lifestyle. Your job is not to be perfect. Perfection is an illusion. Your job is to show up, to do the work, to guard the mind from laziness and distraction, to reflect each day, not for shame but for sharpening, to take ownership of your responses, to take inventory of your inner life, to simplify, to remove the clutter of comparison, resentment, and regret, to live with intention, not rushed, not reactive, but rooted. That is how the rewiring holds. That is how you become reliable to yourself. Even when you fail, and you will, you begin again. You return to the breath. You anchor yourself back in the rhythm of awareness. You remember that one misstep does not undo the entire path. You return to the silence, to the sacred pause between stimulus and response, to the space where the real work begins. You return to the page, not to write perfectly, but to see clearly, to confront your mind and guide it gently back to its center. You return to the stillness where clarity is born and the soul realigns. You remember that the person you are becoming is not the result of one act, one success, or one breakthrough. It is not forged in inspiration alone. It is the culmination of 1,000 small decisions, done quietly, done daily, done without applause or recognition, done when it's hard, when you're tired, when every part of you wants to quit, done when it's boring, because discipline does not demand entertainment, done with conviction, because you believe that who you are becoming matters more than how you feel in the moment. And that is what transforms a person. Not a burst of motivation, not a dramatic change, but a lifetime of showing up. showing up when it's inconvenient, showing up when no one is watching, showing up with humility when you stumble and with grace when you rise. It is the ritual of return that rewires your brain. It is the refusal to give up on your better self, no matter how many times you fall. Each time you return, you reinforce the identity you are building. One choice, one moment, one breath at a time. Create a Stoic reset ritual. Every week, set aside 1 hour of uninterrupted time to examine your internal landscape. This is not about judgment, it's about awareness. Use it as a sacred checkpoint where you recalibrate your mind and soul. Review your behavior over the past week, not just in outcomes, but in how you showed up moment by moment. Revisit your values. Did you act with courage, with discipline, with compassion or wisdom when it counted? Then ask yourself hard questions. Ask, did I live according to reason, or did I let impulse drive the wheel? Where did I let emotion take over, anger, fear, envy, and what can I learn from it? What can I improve next week, not to be perfect, but to be more aligned with the person I aspire to become? Write your answers down. Let the process be reflective and raw. This is not performance, it is private refinement. Let this ritual become your anchor, the way you cleanse the dust of the world from your mental lens, your method of realigning with truth, of returning to center, your way of never drifting too far from the path of reason and virtue, no matter how chaotic life becomes.